Welcome to the American Academy of Grief Counseling's Videogram on the evolution of grief and loss over time. And this is a video that's going to look at how grief changes over time and how it affects the griever. Now, we all know grief changes you once it occurs. We refer to this as the acute stage of grief, and it's very intense and very raw. Over time, healthy grieving replaces that intensity and that rawness with feelings that are still remorseful, but more bearable in themselves. So, with the first year in itself, many things will reopen after this intensity initially passes. New wounds will reopen with anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays themselves. So, that is quite natural. It's not a setback, but it's a remembrance. And any wound, depending on how strong the attachment was, can always have this ability to bleed at a moment's notice when properly triggered. It's just over time it becomes less, and the chance of that occurring becomes less. So while grief never truly fades, it does alter and change us. We're able to adjust and adapt as time proceeds, and we become less constantly preoccupied with the loss. So we're not going to experience what we would refer to as closure, because there is never closure if you loved someone or if you highly valued something. There's never going to be closure in that, but there can be what we refer to as an adjustment to that loss. As an organism, any organism, we are able to adjust. And emotionally, we should be able to adjust. So while there will always be a before and after, we can still be able to live in the present and plan for the future despite that before phase in our lives. Almost as if our whole life is a book with various chapters and tying together the chapters that were more painful in the past with the present chapters pushing forward to the future chapters, all being unified and tied together. And this helps give life meaning and purpose without forgetting the loss, but also progressing forward with it in mind, but being able to adjust. And healthy grieving, healthy bereavement over time gives us this ability to move forward. So our emotions over time are not going to be as intense or as raw as it would have been during the acute phase. Emotions will still oscillate, especially when correlated with holidays, but this oscillation will become less frequent and less intense. You will be able to have a more consistent emotional self as time progresses through the grieving process without having a bad day and a good day just every other week or so. Instead, it will become every other month. And then sometimes it might be every other few months. So the oscillation does tend to become less intense and as less frequent. The memory of the deceased may even over time finally give a smile to oneself. Oneself will be able to recall some of the more happier moments and some of the joy and the good, and not just focus on the pain. There might even become a period of gratitude for the time that was had. So less negative emotions will emerge in regards to regret or anger that might have been there initially over a particular loss, and one will be able to look forward to a healthier future life, one filled more so with hope and an understanding of the importance the person played in their life. Now, what if emotions do not change over time? In some cases, due to complications in grief and trauma, a person may actually need counseling to accept and adjust to this particular loss over time. So we refer to this as complicated grief. It's a pathological grief in that it is not a natural grieving process. And this requires clinical professional counselors, not just pastoral counselors in this regard. And when these types of complications occur in grief, we see individuals who suffer from depression, anxiety, extreme sadness, and guilt, and they are completely unable to integrate into regular life. This is where we see cases of depression or prolonged grief in itself, which all fall under the umbrella of complicated grief. Now, over time, whether it's complicated or not, an individual is going to experience what we refer to as secondary losses. So things can start to get difficult. For instance, the widow, she may no longer have a higher income due to the loss of her husband and the position which he held. There will be more loneliness. She may lose security and help around the house, which are traditionally male orientated duties. Or if a widower, he may no longer have that emotional security and intimacy. He may no longer have the basic feminine traditional orientated duties such as cooking or the washing of clothes. And if his wife stayed at home, there's going to be less tasks completed at home. Now, I am aware that there are modern families with dual roles, but there are also many families still that lay within this traditional setup where a man does a particular thing and a woman does a particular thing. And in these cases, these secondary losses will really manifest after that other person is gone. Also, for instance, a parent may no longer feel as a parent. That self-identity may be lost if they lost a child. Graduations, weddings, and lack of grandchildren can manifest throughout their life. And again, it might not be as intense or as frequent, might not oscillate as much, but again, wounds can be reopened over time, even in healthy grieving itself. A child, for instance, who might lose a parent will lose that very important stability in their life. They might not have as well of a life in terms of education, finance, a more stable home life and values. And when they experience their future events, whether it's prom or a wedding, maybe they will not have a father to hand them over to their new husband. So the loss itself can negatively affect and have a domino effect on individuals throughout their subsequent life. And these are things that need to be identified early during the grieving process to prepare the individual for it. One final note, the loss of friends can also occur in various lifestyles. Not just the relationship with the individual, but certain friends may no longer come around as much. Maybe one friend was a friend of the particular spouse more so, or maybe a different person was a friend with a particular one of your children, and you no longer see these individuals anymore. Also, lifestyles themselves, what you used to do. Maybe one as a couple traveled more, and this is no longer occurring. So secondary losses are something to identify early and be prepared for. Memories fading are probably one of the biggest fears because individuals are afraid they're going to lose the sound of the voice or a particular scent that the individual wore or a memory of an experience that was shared. So there is a great fear of fading of memories. The good news is the brain is trained in itself to keep certain memories, more so than other memories. Mundane, everyday activities are easily forgotten, but memories that have a profound impact on us are automatically known to be engraved deeper into our subconscious itself. And so these memories are more vibrant, there's more neural connections with them. So fortunately, memories can fade to an extent, but the neural connections are so much stronger for especially important events that it is less likely for this to occur. If there is a greater fear for this, one way to strengthen neural networking is through journaling, scrapbooking, memorials, keeping traditions alive, storytelling, and keeping recordings or other visible objects that are very prominent to that individual. And this way, the individual remains alive with you through your progression, through the evolution of one's grief. Unfortunately, as time progresses, though, we tend to see a lack of support for the bereaved in their particular loss. After the funeral, many well-wishers fade, and after a year, close friends may not even remark about the loss. Maybe they're fearful to bring it up. They don't want to awaken a ghost within you. So there's no longer any references, and the one who is suffering from the loss no longer is receiving the validation that they need regarding it, and it can be very upsetting. And then, on the contrary, as opposed to those who might seek to avoid the bereaved, you might have individuals who are grief bullies, and we've used this term before in past videos, who look to dismiss the loss and forbid one to even talk about the loss anymore, and to exclaim that one should move on with their life. Many may try to push a spouse to look to date again or to go places when they're not ready. So over time, people are going to have their opinions about how you should move on with your life. And that is not their place. And that's not good grief support in itself. So it is all on your own terms as one progresses over time with grief. Those of us that are educated in grief counseling and grief training need to keep tabs on those who experienced the loss 1 year ago, then 2 years ago, and understand that that loss, while adjusting, while altering, no longer is as intense and painful. Maybe it still exists within the person and still needs to be discussed. And we need to see if our loved ones who are grieving healthy, and that they are not falling into prolonged grief or depression or other pathological states themselves. So the evolution of grief is something that happens over time. There's the acute phase, then there's that first year and all its anniversaries, and then it proceeds to the second and third and subsequent years, and how one experiences that. Will the oscillations decrease or increase? Will the intensity decrease or increase? And that depends on the complications and how one learns to grieve properly within itself. We are the American Academy of Grief Counseling. There's our link. Our number is 330-652-7776. And our email is info@AIHCP.org. I'd like to thank you for listening and have a good day.